The movie opens with a boy inside an elevator, his face full of confusion and fear as he desperately calls for help. The elevator, however, continues its climb, eventually bringing him to an unfamiliar and unsettling place. As the doors open, he finds himself surrounded by a group of young men, all laughing and chatting among him. This group, known as the Gladers, observes him with curious eyes. The boy, who later discovers his name is Thomas, has no memory of who he is or how he got there. In a panic, he attempts to run but stumbles to the ground, only then noticing that the area is enclosed by towering stone walls. Afterward, Albie, the leader of the Gladers, steps forward, trying to calm Thomas and familiarize him with the surroundings. Albie explains that this is where they live, where they prepare their food, and where they've built their shelters. He also mentions that whenever they need something extra, it arrives in what they call the box. When Thomas asks who sent them there, Albie admits that they have no idea. Albie then introduces Thomas to Newt, who takes charge when Albie isn't around. He also lays out their 3 key rules everyone must apply. Meanwhile, a boy named Chuck strikes up a conversation with Thomas. As Chuck talks, he notices Thomas heading towards the wall, and panic sets in. He knows all too well the dangers that await anyone who crosses that boundary. Thomas, however, seems more curious and eager than afraid, drawn to the wall despite Chuck's warnings about the severe consequences. Just then, the runners emerge from the maze, and Thomas, confused, questions why they are allowed beyond the wall if it's forbidden. Chuck explains that only the runners are permitted because they have the most knowledge about the maze. Suddenly, Gally appears, grabbing Thomas to stop him from going any further. Thomas reacts aggressively, struggling against Gally's restraint, and a tense moment unfolds as the other boys gather around. Albie steps in to calm Thomas, but just as he does, a strange noise echoes from within the wall. That evening, Newt sits down for a casual conversation with Thomas, sharing more about their situation. He mentions how Gally once saved his life and explains the dangers of the maze. Newt points out the runners, explaining that for the past 3 years, they've been mapping the maze, tirelessly searching for a way out. He warns Thomas about the dire consequences of getting trapped in the maze overnight and speaks of the mysterious creatures known as grievers, which no one has ever seen but everyone fears. As Newt talks, Thomas begins to feel a deep sense of trapped and frustrated. Despite this, his memory remains confused and he still can't remember his name. Later, Thomas and Gally find themselves in a physical game where the goal is to push each other out of a circle, with the other boys cheering them on. In the middle of the game, something clicks in Thomas's mind, and suddenly, he remembers his name. The realization stops him in his tracks, and the game abruptly ends. The following morning, Albie wakes Thomas early to show him a special spot where all the boys carve their names. He tells Thomas that while things might seem happy, they've all experienced some very dark days. Handing Thomas a knife, Albie instructs him to add his name to the wall. As Thomas starts carving, he notices some of the names are crossed out and asks Albie why. Albie responds indirectly, simply saying, "dark days," leaving Thomas to ponder the meaning behind those words. Thomas isn't satisfied with the vague answers he's been given, so he continues to press Newt for more information while they work together. He questions the chances of escaping their wall, but Newt, clearly irritated, insists that they've tried every possibility and that the maze is their only hope of finding a way out. Frustrated, Newt commands Thomas to bring fertilizer from the nearby forest. As Thomas searches for the fertilizer, he stumbles upon a disturbing sight: human bones scattered on the ground. Confused and alarmed, he barely has time to react when Ben suddenly appears behind him. Without warning, Ben lunges at Thomas, attacking him with a wild fury. In the struggle, Thomas manages to kick Ben in the head using a skull, then runs back toward the other boys. Newt quickly intervenes, delivering a decisive blow to Ben's head, and they all notice that Ben has been stung. Albie immediately orders that Ben be thrown into the pit, despite Ben's desperate pleas for help. Meanwhile, Thomas, still shaken, asks Albie what is happening to Ben. Albie explains that it's called the changing, a condition with no cure that only worsens over time. He warns that the infection could spread, making Ben a danger to everyone. Then Albie and the other boys use long sticks to push Ben toward the wall. As Ben pleads desperately, the wall closes, sealing him away and leaving the group in a sad silence. Albie decides to enter the maze to retrace Ben's footsteps before sundown. As the day fades, all the Gladers, including Thomas, anxiously await Albie and Minho's return. When they finally appear, it's clear something is wrong. Albie looks severely weakened, but just as they near the closing wall, time runs out. Then Thomas does the unthinkable. He runs into the maze, slipping inside just before the wall seals shut, leaving everyone stunned. Thomas discovers that Albie has been stung and quickly urges Minho to help him find a place to hide Albie. As they attempt to lift Albie to the top of a wall for safety, Minho suddenly hears a terrifying sound nearby and, overwhelmed with fear, leaves Thomas, running off on his own. Left alone, Thomas soon comes face to face with a griever. In a panic, he hides underground, but the griever spots him and gives chase. Then Thomas sprints away at an incredible speed. As he leaps over a wall, the griever gets trapped by some plants. Minho, who has regained his composure, calls out to Thomas, urging him to escape as the maze begins to shift. But instead of running, Thomas deliberately draws the griever's attention to himself, leading it on a wild chase. Just as the maze walls begin to close, the griever is trapped and crushed, meeting its end. Against all odds, Thomas, Albie, and Minho manage to escape the the maze and return safely, to the surprise of the waiting Gladers, who never expected them to survive. Gally is visibly displeased, believing that Thomas has broken the rules by entering the maze, and he argues that Thomas should be punished. However, the other Gladers are reluctant to agree, as Thomas is the only one who has ever managed to kill a griever. With Albie incapacitated, Newt, now in charge, asks Minho for his thoughts. Minho, acknowledging Thomas's bravery, explains that Thomas not only saved Albie, but also accomplished something no one else had ever done by defeating the griever. Then Minho suggests that instead of punishing Thomas, they should make him a runner. As the Gladers are deep in discussion, they are suddenly interrupted by the sound of the box opening. Running over to investigate, they are shocked to find a girl inside, something that has never happened before, as no girl has ever arrived in the Glade. Clutched in her hand is a note that reads, "She is the last one ever," leaving the group confused. Just then, the girl regains consciousness briefly, calling Thomas's name before fainting again. Despite the strange familiarity, Thomas doesn't recognize her. Thomas, determined to uncover more about the maze, decides to venture back inside. Minho, initially hesitant and trying to dissuade Thomas, eventually agrees with his plan, though he advises caution. He tells Thomas to wait for him in the woods while he gathers a few other Gladers for support. Soon, Minho returns with a small group, and together they re-enter the maze. As they navigate through the maze, they come across the remains of the griever that Thomas had trapped earlier, its body crushed by the wall. Digging through the creature's remains, they discover a strange device embedded inside it. With the device in hand, they quickly make their way back to the Glade, just in time before the maze walls close for the night. Meanwhile, Thomas points out that the letters on the device they found match those on their supplies, suggesting someone is behind both the grievers and their situation. Gally, unwilling to accept this, argues that Thomas should be punished, claiming the rules are what hold them together. Newt decides to punish Thomas by making him spend a night in the pit without food but also promotes him to runner, a decision that clearly Gally angry. Afterward, Minho shares with Thomas the map pattern of the maze that he has meticulously crafted over the years, a secret known only to him and Albie. As Minho explains the maze and the map's significance, their conversation is abruptly interrupted by some of the boys rushing in to announce that the girl has woken up. Thomas approaches the girl, calming her by sharing his own experience and reassuring her that all the boys, himself included, arrived in the same way she did. The girl, revealing her name is Teresa, gradually relaxes. Later, she hands Thomas 2 syringes she discovered in her pocket when she first arrived, adding another layer of mystery to their situation. Thomas persuades Newt to try using the syringe on Albie, hoping it might cure him. Though hesitant, Newt eventually agrees. As Thomas approaches Albie to administer the syringe, Albie suddenly wakes up and tries to attack him. In the chaos, Teresa quickly steps in and injects Albie with the syringe, causing him to calm down. While Thomas is in the pit, Chuck sneaks in with food and water, excited about Thomas and Minho's upcoming maze exploration. Chuck gives Thomas a small toy to return to his parents, but Thomas hands it back, telling Chuck he'll deliver it to them himself someday. The next day, Thomas and Minho race through the maze, with Thomas noticing more details than before. Suddenly, the device they found starts emitting an increasingly loud sound, leading them to believe it's guiding them. Following the signal, they arrive at a strange area Minho has never seen. As they explore, the blades and walls begin closing in with alarming speed and force, but they manage to escape just in time. Afterward, Minho explains what they discovered in the maze, revealing that they found a door that the grievers used during the day, suggesting a possible way out. Chuck and the other Gladers become excited, placing their trust in Thomas and Minho. However, Gally pushes back, warning them that there could be dozens of grievers waiting on the other side. While Gally and Thomas are in a heated argument, Teresa interrupts to inform them that Albie is awake. They rush to see him, but Albie, now filled with despair, tells Thomas there's no way out. He then reveals that Thomas was once their favorite, questioning why Thomas is even there. At that moment, a strange sound echoes outside, and they discover that the maze doors are no longer closing. Thomas, shocked, watches as walls from different directions open, releasing grievers into the Glade. Chaos erupts as the grievers attack, and everyone runs for their lives. Albie sacrifices himself to save Chuck, getting taken by the grievers. After the disaster, Gally punches Thomas, accusing him of being responsible for everything. In a desperate attempt to regain his lost memories, Thomas intentionally stings himself with a griever device. Gally, having convinced most of the Gladers to follow him, takes control of Newt and locks Thomas and Teresa in the pit. While confined, Thomas confesses to Newt and Chuck that he and Teresa were once part of the group responsible for their fault, though Teresa has no memory of it. Newt, eager to end the conflict, urges Thomas to finish what he started, reminding him that Albie's death would otherwise be meaningless. Thomas and his team cleverly outsmart Gally, convincing some of the Gladers to join them in escaping the maze, insisting that the place is not their true home. Despite Gally's doubt, he wishes them luck against the grievers. As Thomas and his group navigate the maze, they encounter fierce resistance from the grievers. When they finally reach the gate, they find it locked and secured by a code. Minho quickly relays the code to Teresa, and with it, they manage to unlock the gate and escape the maze. After escaping the maze, Thomas and the others find themselves inside a mysterious laboratory. Suddenly, a video message from Dr. Ava Page, the director of the World Catastrophe Kill Zone Department, appears. She informs them that they have completed the maze trials. She goes on to reveal that billions of lives have been lost due to catastrophic events. Dr. Page then explains that a deadly, incurable virus is ravaging the world, attacking the brain. In her final message, she emphasizes that they are important for the coming situation. The movie concludes with Gally, now stung, confronting the group. He points a gun at Thomas but accidentally shoots Chuck, killing him. In response, Minho throws a spear, killing Gally. Soon after, armed soldiers arrive, rescuing the group and taking them away in a helicopter. The final scene reveals a group of people discussing the outcome, noting that more survivors made it through than expected. Then they disclose that the survivors are now entering phase 2 of the experiment. With that, the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.